is we have responsibilities as a church member that God has given to us as as members of His body. And so that was the main thrust last week. This week, we're going to talk about treating a sick body. Now, when I introduced this topic last week, I did not know how sick I was going to get. God did. I have a good illustration of treating a sick body. A sick body that allows sickness to go through it is a miserable one. So we're going to talk about how we can treat a sick body of believers. A body has to be healthy in order for it to grow. But, just like Charlie and I this week, bodies get sick. Church assemblies fall into sin and get mired down. They don't get along. That's a sick body. So, as we reread Ephesians 4, 1 through 16, the reminder here is that there is only one body. One body. And it's something that we have to think about, that there is only one church. Now, we may have little satellites. We may have little outposts of the church. There's only one church. And it's not in only one denomination. It is uniquely those who Christ calls his own. That is the church. That is the one body. Christ is exclusive. He is the shepherd of his flock. We can't fall into this idea, well, there's many ways, there's many roads that lead to heaven. It's not the way the Bible explains salvation. So there's one body, and it is a body. If your body is fighting other parts of your body, you would have problems. If you have a neurological disease where you can't control certain aspects of the members of your body, you have real issues in your day-to-day life. That's the same as when it comes to church. If I'm in a battle against somebody else in our church body, we are not a healthy body. We are not productive. We are not unified. So when Paul says in Ephesians 4:4, there is one body, it means it's only Christ's body. It is uniquely the church, and it is this unity that should characterize it. Just as your physical body functions as a unit, so should church. So you and I are all old enough to understand that sinners fill every church that you go to. And so whenever we get to this topic of getting along, we say, well, it's impossible. It can't be done. I have so many different stories about how this person did that person. Yeah, I understand. But the idea is in Ephesians 4:3, it says, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The key is that endeavoring, working hard at it. We must work at unity. It doesn't come naturally. So we have to recognize there is a need for unity. And if our church is going to thrive, we have to have unity. So let's just think right now, how would we rate our unity? How would we rate ourselves at helping or hindering the unity of our church? Because as we think about our important questions about what church growth is, what causes it, or whether I'm helping or hindering it, we have to understand that this key aspect of unity is at the very foundation. We have to be endeavoring, working at, to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Church is a group of people that have been grouped by Christ that, normally speaking, would not be grouped up together. That's the great thing about churches that have many different generations within them, have different people who have different backgrounds, because we're not called by the same sort of ethnicity, or we're not called from the same sort of political system or economic background or anything like that. We're called by Christ, and so he calls people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And so we are joined to people that are similar to us in some ways and dissimilar to us in other ways. If you think about the 12 disciples, Jesus picks Levi, who's a tax collector. And then he also picks a guy who's a zealot, who wants to violently overthrow the Roman government. He gets both of these guys in his group of disciples. And we never read once about how they got into a fist fight, rolling around in the desert and their sandals flying all over the place. Because they were unified in their call to Christ. And they understood that his will was to be done. So, in verse 1, Paul says, I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you. Now, when Paul is writing this, do you know where he is writing it? On the top of a cruise ship?
In jail.
He's in jail. He is in jail right now. And he is still connected with them. He says, I and you. He is writing from a Roman prison. He's passionate for their growth, both as individuals and as a church. The thing that these Ephesians held in common with Paul was their faith in Jesus Christ. Do you see kind of where we build our foundation of unity here? Where we attach each other to each other? Our faith in Jesus Christ is what unites us. And they had been united in church. So, when you started attending church, you didn't just arrive at a place or a map or enter a building. You gathered with a group of people. Going to a church means assembling with them, worshiping, growing, united with other people. The church in Ephesus brought two vastly different people groups together. Paul was a Jew, and the Ephesians were predominantly Gentile. They were divided as a people group could be. But through Christ, the believers who belonged to these two hostile people groups were united into one group, the church. Paul will talk about those who were near and those who were far off, those who were not a people but are now a people. That's the gathering of Christ, of Jew and Gentile. And so when he's talking to them, he is reminding them that they were called to Christ. And they were called to Christ into one body. You see, their attitudes towards one another had to be totally transformed from what they had before they were saved. If they took in those same sort of attitudes to say, Jewish people or to Gentile people, and vice versa, they would never get along. Their attitudes towards let me say it this way, their natural attitudes towards their other group of people had to be transformed based on their faith in Jesus Christ. Just as arms and legs are united by one physical body, you are united with others in Christ's body. We look differently. We eat different things. We root for different teams. We drive different cars. We have different interests in different favorite things. But we're united in Christ. And that's done through church. Your church unites you with people you probably wouldn't have associated with because you are so different. But your church has brought us together. So, if we are a united church to be able to be a functioning organism, what does it mean to be in unity? Well, together does not mean unity. You know, sometimes you hear people talk about, well, it's so nice that we're all together. And then you think about, well, you really knew how well we got along together. We're not really together. You ever took a long cross-country road trip with kids? Well, you're all together, right? How wonderful and special that we're all together. We're unified. No, we're not. No. There's complaining. There's arguing. Do you see that person? Are you going to hit that person? Are you not going to hit that person? Why didn't you turn on your signal? Why are the kids fighting so much? Well, you're all together, right? But together doesn't equal unity. We could have a whole group of people in this auditorium and have people sitting here together, and we could be violently opposed to one another. Together does not equal unity. The author points out, just because there haven't been any big church fights lately, that doesn't mean we have unity. Being together in church does not equal unity. The problem is we are all naturally self-centered. We all are. And we view and treat other church members in ways that are sinful. When Paul goes on after he says that I and you, he says, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Again, it's that attitude of lowliness, gentleness, long-suffering to be able to endeavor to work at maintaining and protecting the unity of the church. Why? Because we are naturally self-centered. We are naturally self-centered. And that brings a breakdown of relationships that we have with other church members. So Paul gives us attitudes that we need to have to work out that unity. Lowliness, gentleness, long-suffering, and love. Why? Because the Ephesians were selfish people. And these Antiochian and Oakley people are selfish people too. We need these attitudes as well. And so let's ask ourselves some questions. We need to think, am I capable of hindering the unity of the church by my attitude towards other people? Of course, we all are. He says, differences, disappointments, offenses, and frustrations between church members distance them from one another. Now, I don't want you to think of different examples right now. I want you to think of the principle. Okay? I want your minds going farther afield than it should be. People's attitudes, actions, and reactions towards others cause church members who are theologically united to be practically divided. Now, there's always debates on theology. But many times we'll have people that are theologically united. We all believe the same thing 99%, 99.5%. But it's the attitude, it's the pride, it's the whatever the opposite of long-suffering is, short anger, short fuse, and lack of love that causes separation. Many times, these are the problems. It's the immaturity of the believers that cause these divisions. We have to acknowledge that we are capable of hindering unity in the church with our attitude. I'm not even talking about your theological position. Just our general attitude towards other people and other believers. We are capable of hindering unity in the church. Now, that should concern you, or if it hasn't already come up in your mind. He says where there is disunity in a church, just like in a body, the body is sick. So, what can we do about it? Well, a healthy body's members are joined and knit together, Ephesians 4:16. What's the treatment for a sick body? Well, the first thing that we're going to look at to treat this disunity is having the right attitude towards God. In Ephesians 4:1, he says that we have to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called. To walk is to live out in day-to-day life. That's the idea of we are all becoming a different person than we were yesterday. Tomorrow's person will be different than today's person. We are all heading some direction. So what he says is have a walk, a daily practice of life that is worthy of the calling with which you were called. Now, what calling is he talking about? Well, not the scammer that tried to scam me today about paying my PG&E bill. Have you gotten this one? They called me up at the office and they said, your PG&E bill is past due. I said, I paid online. Good. So here's a number that you can call to make sure it doesn't get turned off. It's getting turned off today. Well, as you can see, it didn't get turned off. I checked pgne.com and I had paid the bill, and it's just one of those scams that's going along. So that's not the calling that I should be walking worthy of. The calling is what God has called you and me to be. That's the point. To be unified, to work out our unity together, to have the right attitude towards each other, first starts with what God has called us to be. Because if we start looking around and say, well, I'm better than that person, and I'm better than her, and I'm much more faithful than this person, or I'm smarter than him, and I can do all this, this, and this, then we have this pride that we can compare ourselves to other people, and, if that person doesn't like the way I treat them, well, too bad. They're inferior to me. That's where we have to start thinking about, am I walking in a way that is worthy? A way that God has called you to be in Christ. So the point of this is, make walking worthy of the Lord your mission in life. If you try to impress somebody, say if at work and you're worried about your boss, or your head's on a swivel as soon as that boss is around, or the email that you send him or her, women can be bosses too, is really sharp, or it's got a funny quote at the end, or, you're really trying your best to impress your boss. The idea of walking worthy of the Lord is knowing that we are to be more like Jesus Christ, knowing that he sees us at all times, that we try our very dead level best to do what's right in both what we think, how we feel, and what we do. Because if we just walk naturally, we're going to separate from people because of our attitude towards them. And that's what we cannot do. That's what we should not do. So, we have to be intentional about unity. We have to endeavor about being unified. We have to work at it. We have to be diligent. We have to put forth effort in contributing to the unity of your church. That has to do with having the right attitudes towards ourselves, towards one another. include? Am I helping or hindering unity? Am I doing my best to walk worthy of the Lord? Am I willing to put diligent effort into cultivating or growing unity in our church? And this is something that you can think about. What does lowliness, gentleness, and long-suffering look like in a church? Because those are the attitudes that Paul says that you need to have to work on unity in a church. If you have pride, if you have arrogance, if you have short fuses, you're not going to have a unified church. You're going to have a very angry, disunified church. So next time, we're going to get into those attitudes of lowliness and gentleness and develop that unity where it wasn't already. Any questions on that? All right, so we have some prayer requests tonight.